Welcome to How It Works with Holger. Hope you're having a great day. This is part 3 of the series about web deployment. And today is the day that we will look into another operating system. We're going to leave Windows and we're going to look into Linux. And Linux has the giant advantage that you can set up as many virtual machines or as many Docker containers as you want. You don't have to do anything with regards to license costs because Linux is freely available, different distributions, and Delphi has been known to work very, very well with Ubuntu, and that's why I came to Ubuntu, to be honest with you. Back in the day, I used Fedora and Red Hat and Debian, but more or less, I stick with Ubuntu now. And Ubuntu has two versions, the desktop version and the server version. And the big difference between desktop and server is that the server environment doesn't have any graphical user environment. And that's perfect for our use case, what we want to do. So today, I'm going to show you how to create a virtual machine. And as I am on Mac, I will use Parallels to create this virtual machine. Parallels is a virtualization software. On Windows, you might use VMware or VirtualBox. There are so many different virtualization tools. The key thing is you have to pay attention nowadays what kind of processor your computer system uses. I'm here on a Mac Studio with an Apple Silicon processor. That means I can't use the standard versions, meaning if I look here and go to, this is Ubuntu, basically what I did here in order to get here, I entered Ubuntu Linux server download. That's what I entered. And then I went to the download page and this is how I got here. And by default, it tells me, hey, download version 2404 LTS, long-term support. That's something I would recommend to use. So you don't have to fiddle around with the latest and newest. You want something that is robust and proven for your deployment. So I would always use an LTS version. And this one here would be nice to have for me, but I can't use it on the system. And for whatever reason, Ubuntu is one of the few sites that does not recognize my CPU. I don't know why they do this. So if you have a Intel processor, not an ARM or ARM CPU, like not Apple Silicon, this is the one you need to pick. It's the 64-bit version. The ARM version is very, very much hidden. I had to use Google in order to find it, but it's hidden down here. If you go down, 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 and here, alternative architectures. And ARM is what you need to do if you are using an Apple Silicon processor. So you download the image here, and as soon as the download is complete, you can start creating your virtual machine. If you don't know what a virtual machine is, please stop the video here and look on YouTube for a tutorial. I can't explain it in great detail. In a nutshell, it's a computer inside of your computer that can have any other operating system. And in this case, it doesn't matter if you have a Windows operating system or a macOS operating system. You run the Linux system as a separate computer, so to speak, on top of your operating system. And as soon as the download is done, we can basically go to Parallels and say, create new virtual machine. And the nice thing is they do have now on Parallels, they do have for the Apple Silicon version, they do have links so that you can go to the different Linux distributions if you so desire. Even Windows 11, right here, if you click Get Windows 11 from Microsoft and click on Continue, they give you the information what you need to do to run Windows 11 on Apple Silicon. You need the Windows 11 ARM version. It's not the normal version of Windows. I will keep it simple. We will use Ubuntu Linux and continue. And the system is so smart. It finds the ISO that I downloaded. So with the ISO being available, I simply click continue. And of course, if it isn't being found, you can also click choose manually, continue. And then I'm going to say this is my Ubuntu server. I also started to put the version in there so I know that it's like the 2404 LTS version or just 24 LTS or something like that. This is the directory, and I want to customize the settings so I can show you what's getting created. So hardware-wise, I'm going to create one with 4 gigabytes. I'm going to go up a little bit. You see this system has a crazy 128 gigs. It recommends using 2 CPUs. That's fine. And then, yeah, with network, this is something strange. Oh, here it is, bridge network. That's what we're going to select because I want this thing to have an IP address inside of the network that I'm working in. So that makes it easy to have the virtual machine as part of your own network. And go close this here. And we say continue. So the disk space, 64 gigabytes is great. Memory, 4 gigs, 2 CPUs. Continue. And now the virtualization tool is going to start up the ISO image. And this is now already the window from the boot environment. Let me close this window in the background that we're not getting distracted with this. So right here. So we try or install Ubuntu server. And with that, it boots into the console of the server. And I'm just going to guide you through the installation. And as soon as it starts to just copy files and all that stuff, I'm going to fast forward, of course. So first is your language. It's English in my case. German is available. I still prefer English all the time. And then my keyboard is a US layout. You might have to change that. It's also normally Ubuntu is pretty good to identify it. So done. Yes, I want to install the full Ubuntu server in this case, not the minimized version, because I want to be able to log into that server. You know, I don't want something that is completely separated from my own system. Done. And here we see the Ethernet has the IP address from the network that I'm connected to. That's perfect. So that's my subdomain 192.168.0. That's me. That's perfect. And then done. I don't need a proxy address. I'm just pressing enter all the time. On the bottom, you see here, done and back. So I say done. And now it's testing the mirror for the installation. It's testing the speed and the availability of that. So at some point you're going to get, okay, mirror location passed test. So I'm going to say done. And I want to use the entire disk for the full 64 gigabytes here and say done. And then here is the partitioning. Doesn't really matter. I'm just going to say done. Okay. Yes, I know this is destructive. So because don't be afraid. This is only the space for your virtual environment. That's not going to have any impact on your real system. Continue. My name is Holger Flick. Server name is Ubuntu. Deploy VM. Pick a username, Holger. Choose a password. Okay, and done. And I don't want to enable Ubuntu Pro. That is some sort of security package with subscriptions and all that kind of stuff. You can look into that yourself. If that's interesting for you, I'm just going to skip. And this is the most important stuff. So press space, or I think enter works too. Yes, to check install OpenSSH server. That we need that server in order to access the machine from the outside. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to log in. So done. And then here, if you want to, you can enable Docker like this, or if you're interested, you can also install a Postgres server right away. I never use these defaults. Done. And that's it. So now the Linux system is being installed, and you'll be surprised how quick this is. I mean, this is, of course, a very, very quick computer system that I'm using. You saw I have like 20 CPUs and all that stuff, but the virtualized system is only using 2 and is only using 4 gigs of RAM. It kind of shows you how quick Linux is these days and can be used to set up a web server and all these kind of things. So let me just tell you what we're going to do next. So after the installation has taken place, we're going to install a web server, a default web server on this virtual machine. And then we're going to deploy our web application to that virtual machine. I'm going to show you two different ways to do this, because it's not only possible to do this with FTP, because if you have your project inside of a GitHub repository, for example, or a Git repository on one of your servers, versioning servers, you can simply pull the source or the release project from that repository and use that instead of copying things back and forth. And you also have versioning in place so that you always know which version, which of the release versions you have in place there. That's just something I want to put out there. Git or GitHub or GitLabs and all these kind of versioning tools are really, really helpful, because you can install them easily inside of Linux, and using the command line you can then clone and always pull the updates for your applications for deployment. That makes things very, very easy without you having to do these things manually. You could even make this a cron job, that on a regular basis these kind of things get updated if you wanted it, if it's for development purposes, for example, that your Linux machine that has the deployment is always in sync with the stuff that you want to test. So now at this point I'm going to let everything fast forward, because it's going to take a little bit to install the kernel, but after that I'll be right back. So that's it. Installation is complete. That's the message. And now it asks us, the install process asks us to reboot. So we simply click on reboot now. Just a heads up, on my other Mac system that I used for testing, exactly this message here, please remove the installation medium, then press enter. You just press enter here, and then it actually reboots. Of course, we don't have a real CD in there. You know, that's how this works. Like the virtual machine application kind of simulates a CD drive for you that you can use to install. Okay, with that, we have the login right here. We're not going to log in as root. We're going to log in as the user that we just created, like Holger, and then the password that I used, 1, 2, 3, 4. There we go. And we're logged in. That's all it took to set up a Linux system on inside of a virtual machine. And with this, now we're on the console that we can use to issue our commands to the Linux system. First thing, of course, that I usually do is sudo. That means super user, right? Because we're Holger, we're not root. Root is like the administrator. So you can either do this, you can do sudo.i, and then the password is the password for us. So it's the same thing that you set up while we're doing the setup. And now you root. You see that right here on the front? You're no longer acting as Holger, you're acting as root. So you're the super user of the system. You have to be careful if you do that. So sudo-i gets you into the interactive mode for the super user. That makes it easier to work with, because you don't have to start every command with sudo and can just basically start everything as if you were the super user. So apt update, that updates all the packages on the system. And then you can say apt upgrade, that downloads all the newest stuff from the internet. I'm simply going to say yes. Remember, uppercase, you know. So yes. And then with this, but I think the yes is the default if you just press enter, to be honest with you. And now we get all the latest updates for this virtual machine. You don't have to do this if you just want to test a web server quickly, you know. There's nothing that is like mandatory, but it's good practice to have the latest security updates and all that kind of stuff in place. And with this, we're almost there. So if we open up a browser on our system, like here, I open up my browser here. This is my browser. And if I go to the IP address of the Linux system here, So the command that we want to execute if we don't know what IP address we have, IP address, like that, with a space in between. And there we go. I can see now that on my Ethernet device, this is a local device, I have the IP address right here, 238. This is my IP address right here. I don't know if I can't mark it or anything. The mouse support is not that good in this kind of console because we're running a server. We're not running anything that would have that kind of support in there. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, it means that, let's move this up to the corner here, like so. If we go to the web browser, let me make this a little bit smaller, like so, and like this. Well, that's perfect. So we go to 192.168.0.238. We don't expect this to work, right? So site can't be reached. What we can do now, though, pay attention that you're still root. Otherwise, you have to lead this with a sudo. You can say apt install Nginx. And Nginx is the web server for Linux. I say the because it's the most common right now. There's also Apache and others. Nginx, however, is the one that's used most frequently. Let's try if I just press enter. Yeah, just pressing enter is a yes in this case. And then there we go. It's installed. So what does this change? So let's do the same thing again. Just the IP address, and you see it already updated. Welcome to Nginx. At that point, we have a running web server inside of our Linux system. And the Linux system has the IP address 192.168.0.238. Isn't that amazing? Just installing this package starts up a web server. The nitty-gritty part is now, how do you configure this thing, right? That's what's always difficult. So what you need to know on Linux, everything is in etc. This is where the configuration is. So if we go to etc. and then Nginx, this is with LL, the directory. This is where the configuration is. If you don't like this terminal, you can use the midnight commander. Just a hint. It's not installed by default, so you can say apt install mc. And I don't know how old you are, but that was my go-to in the MS-DOS days. This literally looks like Norton Commander, if you still remember this. And there we can nicely see that we have the configuration file nginx.conf. And with F3, we can view this file. Very confusing at first. I won't make any apologies for it. And this is how you can configure the different web directories, kind of like what we did in part 2 with the static web service. Here you can configure which directories should contain certain things. And by default, you have sites available and sites enabled. I think this is the worst naming scheme ever. Because for a non-native speaker, the difference between the two, oh boy, available, there you list all the sites that could be enabled, right? Because enabled are those that are actually online. So why they didn't pick sites online and sites available, I don't know. Enabled means those are the ones that are accessible from the outside world, more or less. And sites available, there you list all the stuff that you want to add. And how this works is that this configuration file imports everything that's in sites available and in sites enabled, so to speak, and merges that configuration. I don't want to go too deep, you know? And so if we go into sites enabled, we see that it also says default, but with a tiny little @ sign in front of it. And sites available has this. So what you need to remember is you always edit the file in sites available. This is the actual file in here. And the file in sites enabled is just a reference to the sites available. Okay, it's a little bit better visible if you go here and say sites enabled and do LL. You see that, this default points to etc. Nginx sites available default. It's just a reference to the other file. So if I go to sites available and then do the editing there, I can do that with midnight commander, press F4, and then it asks you the first time Easiest, yeah, I agree. Number one is the easiest, nano. So here, boom, you have an editor. You can use the arrow keys. There is no longer the necessity to learn certain keys to navigate. And the key thing is it listens on port 80 by default. In port 443, the SSL port is disabled. And that's normal. And there's only one thing that is really interesting here, the root directory. That's literally the root directory that we set in the second part in the static server from TMS, root directory. This is the directory here, right here, that is used to host our server. Amazing, isn't it? So if we go into this directory here, we should see what we see here, what we host here, the content. Let's check that. So we press Control X to exit. And then we go to the directories here. I'm not even going to use the console, var, and then HTML. And here is an HTML document. And if we look into this HTML document, we see that this is precisely what we see here. Welcome to Nginx. Welcome to Nginx. And then they even added a little bit of styling and all that kind of stuff. And so if we were to make changes to this file, so we go F4, and let's say welcome to Nginx with how it works with Holger, exclamation mark. And then we have, if you just press Control X, save modified buffer, yes, press enter to confirm the file name. And then if we refresh this in the browser, Command R, boom, welcome to Nginx with how it works with Holger. So this is how the server works in Linux. And what you can do now, the easiest thing you can do, you simply remove this file, yes, and replace it with your actual application, right? So even better, you keep this index in here and you create a new directory. You create a new directory and say app1, for example. And into app1 is where you put your application, right? And this is where it gets tricky for quite a few people. Like, how do you get your content over here? And the easiest thing to do for a Delphi developer, I think, that comes from Windows is either to use WinSCP. That's a tool that allows you to copy files over the SSH protocol. So here we go, WinSCP right here. So this is the, why does it say the equivalent to Mac? No, WinSCP. I just want the real page, not the equivalent for Mac. Here it is, free award-winning file manager. And this is really something you can use to transfer files to your Linux machine, okay? Free SFTP. SFTP, that's the thing that's good, because if you know FileZilla, that's this one right here, you can also download a client, and this is the kicker, also for macOS. But again, here the same thing. Pay attention, this for Intel, I think they also have, if you click here on this other, for Apple Silicon. And that's what I'm going to use. I'm going to extract it. I'm doing that in a different window. You can't see that. I'm going to move it to my applications. And then in my applications, I'm going to start FileZilla. And that's, so it's going to ask, yeah, this is something you downloaded from the internet, I'm certain. And then right here, okay. So this is what FileZilla looks like. And then I can click here on the different sites. I already have 2 sites set up for my own hosting for different TMS Web Core applications on one of the hosts I have. I'm going to add a new site, and instead of FTP, I'm going to pick SFTP. I'm going to name the site local deployment, and the host is 192.168.0 dot, and it was 238 if I remember correctly, right? Yes, 238 right here. Port, we don't need to put anything in, but logon type normal, and then your username again. As you specified during the install, press connect, and then you say always trust this host, and okay. And now I am here on the right side connected with my Linux virtual machine. And what I can do here, depending on the access rights that I have, that's the tricky part for Windows users again. If I go to var, and then I go to dub and HTML, see, this is where I have and here's my app 1. I have an app, and in that app, I have my JS, HTML, and HTML file. All those 3 files that we use for our application, right? I copied it from the release directory that we created. So here, web server bin app. Actually, I used the one from the deployed application and zipped it up, and that's how I copied it over. And this might be a little bit confusing. Why do you need to copy it? Well, my Windows is also a virtual machine. That might be different for you. You might be having your Windows machine. So you might not have to do this step, but these 3 files, of course, have to be transferred over to the Linux machine. So on the left might be your Windows machine. On the right, the Linux machine. For me, on the left is my Mac. On the right is the Linux machine. So I just drag it over and see file transfer failed, permission denied, because Holger does not have the rights to write here. So the workaround is you go to your home directory, Holger, create a directory, app, or whatever you want to call it, and then you move the files into that directory or copy the files. And then we can go back here and we leave this left directory as it is. So we tab into here and go here into home and Holger and then app. See, these are the files that we just transferred. So, and if you're like me coming from the DOS days, it was insert back in the day to select multiple files. Nowadays it's Control T, 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 T. So I have those 3, as it says here, 3 files. And then I simply say copy. And because we have both windows open, it automatically allows me to just press OK. And now I have it in my app1 directory. So now if I go back to my web browser and I added the URL, so I go to app1 and there's our application running again. Amazing, huh? So now we have a deployment to Linux with our application. It's really, really cool that it works this easily. With this kind of little amount of work, you can basically get started to get more comfortable with Linux. Ubuntu has great guides for Nginx, and Nginx has also a great documentation what all these parameters do. Let us just dive a little bit into the setup of all this. So we go back to, and I leave the Midnight Commander for this. We go, oh, we're in sites available. That's perfect. So I'm going to go into Nano Default. You listen on port 80. All of them do. And then basically here you have root var where this goes, right? And the subdirectories you can use for all your different applications and you're ready to go, right? This is like the easiest form of a setup. The nice thing is that you can also define domains and subdomains very, very easily in order to get this set up. Here's an example from an actual Linux server that I have running here at home. I have in sites available beta 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are literally my testing deployments. And if I look into any of those files, beta 1, for example, I see that this server has like basically the URL or the IP address of the machine that I'm using it on, and the port is 3000. But also I have a server name which matches the domain, and I also have like SSL enabled and port 80 enabled. And that's the next step that we're going to take. We're going to enable the SSL certificates. So because right now this page is insecure, as you can see, right here. If I go onto here, it says it's insecure. And that means there is no SSL certificate in place because it's just a simple HTTP site. And the nice thing with Nginx is that it offers you a reverse proxy automatically, meaning you can keep your HTTP web application and the web server adds the SSL on top for you without any work. So your development is not affected at all. You can concentrate on developing your TMS Web Core application, and the SSL is added on automatically later on. So how does that work? In order to have an SSL certificate, we also need a domain name. And in order to get a domain, that is something that usually costs money, but there is actually a solution that you can pick that is free. What you can do in this case is you can go to freemyip.com and then create a domain name here with freemyip, and then you get instructions how you can divert that IP address. How it works, it's pretty easy. They give you a domain and then you can update with your token that you receive, your domain name, and that way you set it to the IP address that you basically open this update link from. So it gives you a dynamic IP which always points to the IP address, to the public IP address that you update it from. And that makes it so valuable. So if you update this from the machine that you want to basically create the certificate for, that's the easiest way to do it. Another way, of course, is if you have an actual IP address. So I have my IPs with Ionis. Now let me sign into my portfolio right now. Okay, and what I can do now is I can go to one of my domains, for example, here the Flixmans one, and I go to manage subdomains, and I add a subdomain. I create subdomain, I'll say VM test, for example, and save. And as soon as I have this VM test at flixmans.com, it will be created. And then I can say VM test, find this. It's not there yet. It takes a little bit until these things are created usually. There it is. And then I click on actions and say edit DNS. And this is something I have to blur now because on the record, for the A record, this is the one that you want. You can add an IPv4, or if you have an IPv6 address, you can add the public address of your home that you want to use. So the domain points to your home, to your public IP address, and then your router, because it's port 8, if it's port 80 or port 443, will forward it to the virtual machine that we just set up. So from here, we can say points to, this is my public IP address. How do you find your public IP address? Well, you go to what's my IP address, simply add it like this into the browser here, and then you see it right here. I blurred it, of course, okay? So that's my public IP address. I copy paste that and paste it in here. And then I say, okay, how long? 30 minutes and save. And it tells me, well, other services will be disabled. You can't use them anymore. That's fine. I'm just going to say save. So the next step obviously is that we get a certificate for this web page, because right now, as you can see, it is an unsecure HTTP website. And the first thing we need to do is to request a certificate. And in order to request a certificate, we need to do two things. First, we need a domain. And second, we need to request the certificate for that particular domain. However, the problem is that we can't do that without doing some homework. If you want to host this at home from this virtual machine, what we need to do is we need to forward the ports to this virtual machine. What this means is if somebody enters your domain in the web browser and it's either HTTP or HTTPS, it's port 80 or port 443. And your router that you have in your home needs to know, do I need to forward this to which computer do I need to forward this? And that's what you do on your router, okay? If you don't have a router, you can't do this. If you just have a modem, it's impossible. But if you have a router, which most households do nowadays, it's possible. So you go into your router configuration, and this is a very, very comfortable router, very, very modern. It's from Synology. It has a full-blown user interface with drag and drop and all that kind of stuff. It's the same company that also builds the NAS and the NAS systems, and they have the same kind of operating system on these things. So I go to the Network Center and to port forwarding. And right now we see this is the Linux machine that I just showed you with port 80 and port 443. So I'm going to disable those. I'm going to say apply. Now I go to create. I say the IP address, and now I can either select it here. It's very, very comfortable. 238. Public port is 80. The other port is also 80, the private port. So it means map 80 to 80 on that machine. Create. And I do the same for public port 443. Same thing. 443, 443. Create. And I have to apply it. And as soon as I apply this, so I enter beta.1, flixengineering.com. There we go. I'm now at the one, welcome to Nginx with how it works with Holger, and no longer at the one that I had defined before. That's kind of like the tricky part that you need to understand. Like all my domains that I had before, all of them now go to this particular server because this server is not able to distinguish all the different domains that I had defined, right? That's the tricky part. That's what makes it so difficult at first, okay? So what I'll do now is I go back to my virtual machine, and in my virtual machine, I have to install the tool to create the SSL. You go into the detailed installation that they provide on their site. So you go to certbot, and let me start from the start. So you see here my HTTP website is running what? It's running Nginx on Linux, you say, for example. So you say Ubuntu 20 right here. And then it gives you the exact steps that you need to do if you have a default certificate or a wildcard certificate. What's the difference? A default certificate is something like this if you just have a subdomain with a domain name. A wildcard has a star instead of the VM test here, and means that it is suitable for all the things, all the subdomains with Flixmans. That's not what we want to do. We want to install one for vmtest flixmans.com. And the only thing you need here, you need to be, they call it like you need to be comfortable with the command line. You need to have an HTTP website that is online. It is online. And with an open port 80, it is open with a port 80, and which is hosted on a server, which it is. And all these kind of stuff, we fulfill it all. And we need Snap support. And that's the thing. I don't know. If we don't have Snap installed, we need to install that first. But we can simply check that by going into our here and say Snap, and it works. Ubuntu installs this by default. That's the great thing about Ubuntu. So what we do now is we move this over here, and we simply install certbot. I'm going to say snap install classic certbot. And now it's downloading all the software that we need. And then we need to prepare the certbot command, because right now it's installing it into its own directory. Certbot should not work yet, but in our case, it works automatically without executing this. On my other computer, I had to do this. I had to add this link. So you simply say ln-s. Basically what it means, like it moves the certbot executable link to the user executable, and that way you can execute it. Okay. So now it asks you for an email address to be used for your certificate. So I'm going to say holger@flixengineering.com. And if I'm going to accept all the terms and conditions, yes, I'm going to do that. And this is going to be no, I don't want to do anything, partner or anything. Account is registered. So now I have to enter the domain names that I would like our certificate to be. So it's vmtest.flixmans.com. And I emphasize this at this point. If you enter the domain, you need to see this web server inside of the browser. Otherwise, you did something wrong, okay? So you have to have this working. Otherwise, the next step won't work. Otherwise, they won't issue the SSL certificate to you. So that's that. And now it's requesting a certificate for vmtest.flixmans.com. And there you see my certificate was requested. and was installed. And what also happens now is that it, in the sites available and sites enable, nothing really changes. The only thing that it does is in the default configuration, if you look into it, the default server listens on 80, nothing changes, but if you keep scrolling down here, there is a second server configuration for vmtest.flixmans.com, and it says managed by certbot, and the location of that is still root var HTML. So it uses the same location, so to speak, for this. So what we can do now, if we go to vmtest.flixmans.com, welcome to Nginx, and so let's go to a different site first, and then go to vmtest.flixmans.com. It's secure with an SSL certificate, and it's the standard page. If I now go to /app1, it's our application. And the best thing is, if we go here to the settings, secure, it is with a root certificate, vmtestflixmans.com. We have a certificate, expires next in 3 months, and all that kind of stuff. But the best thing is that because we use certbot, it automatically installs daemons on your Linux machine that these certificates get renewed when they need to be renewed. Because that's the thing with the certificates that certbot creates. It lets encrypt certificates, and these need to be renewed every 3 months. That's why they are free. But certbot installs these services. If you go to certbot, if you do certbot-h for help, you can see here renew and all these kind of things. You can also do certbot certificates. So it shows you the current state of all the certificates. And here it said expiration date, this and then, and it's valid for the next 89 days. But you can be sure that before they expire, they get basically updated and renewed by certbot. That's the nice thing about it. It's really, really not that difficult. If you wanted to host your application somewhere else, you would then, for example, let's say you want to, let's go into the MC, then go back here and do dup, and then we have our application here, right? Let's do a different directory. Let's go into var dup HTML, and let's do, for example, that we don't have this because right now we have the vmtest/app1, right? So what we can do here is we simply make this app1 as our root directory. So what we can do is we go into the configuration, go here, etc. Nginx, or let me do it without the midnight commander. Nginx, today's sites available. And it's all in the default. You can make separate files. That is something that you can learn. So here, this is the one, dup. Let's do app1. And then you do Control O for writing, default, Control X to get out of it. And then you call, basically you have to restart the service so it reads the configuration again. So you do systemctl restart Nginx. That's something you need to just learn. And now we don't no longer need the app1. We can just do this without the /app because our vmtestflixmans.com now points to the correct directory. And this is Linux deployment in a nutshell, more or less. And we're going to do the same thing on a real server in the cloud or on the internet that is hosted by a professional provider, Ionis in this case, and you'll see that we can repeat just the same steps in order to host this thing. One more thing, if you want to take down your Nginx or if you want to take it offline or something like that, what you can do is you simply remove the default file from the enabled. And that's that. So for example, if we have it in sites available right now, and if you go to sites enabled and look here, LL, you simply say rm default. It's just the link, that's why they do it. And now if you restart the server again, this no longer works because we've removed it from the configuration. So now basically the server is doing nothing now. It started, but it's not serving anything. And if you want to basically host it again, you do the reverse. You basically say ln-s, then you point to the actual file that exists and then to the symbolic link that you want to create here. And then you have the symbolic link again in Science enabled. And if you then restart the server, the page will be back and hosted again. So that is Nginx with Linux in a nutshell. I know this has been a lot, especially if you have not worked with Linux before. However, this guide tells you really the most important stuff in about an hour. I mean, you have now a web page that is hosted with an SSL certificate, and I know that that is a problem for most people to create this SSL certificate, and it's really, really not that difficult if you think about it. So I hope this was interesting. Give us a thumbs up, and next time we're going to look at IIS, how we can host our web application with that. Of course, it's going to be using a user interface, a graphical user interface. It's going to be much, much different. But remember, it's the hosting also brings license costs with it. And that's basically the thing that you have to balance out. Do you want to use IIS, which might be a little bit more comfortable to use, but has different costs associated with it? With that, thanks so much for your interest. Stay safe. Bye-bye.